in the seminar, I think we are talking about individual differences in a range of contexts or settings, and the setting or context that I'll be talking about is the transfer into higher education. And specifically, I am discussing the choice of a study program in higher education. Well, we're reviewing different individual factors that help determine whether there's a match between a student and a study program. But let me first give you a little bit of theoretical or a little bit of background. So every student who like to study in higher education, of course, has to choose what type of study he or she will study, will enroll in, and choosing a study program for higher education is often considered a difficult choice by many prospective students. One of the reasons is that there are many programs to choose from. I think our university offers about 60 undergraduate programs, so that's quite a lot. And when you're 18, it's difficult to know what you'd like out of those 60 or even more programs and at some other universities. Another reason that choosing a program for higher education is considered a difficult choice is that many students feel a pressure to choose right. And you see that I've put it in brackets, but because, yeah, what is a right choice? That's obviously a question in itself. But students feel a lot of pressure, for example, from society, because you know, there's no more scholarships, etc. So if you do not make a right decision and you have to transfer into another program, you lose a year and you're faced with high financial costs, for example. So, well, choosing a study program in itself is already a difficult choice. And what we see happening, at least in the Netherlands, is that not everyone chooses right the first time around. So in the Netherlands, about 1 out of 3 first-year students in higher education specifically quit their study program within the first year. And that's both students who drop out completely out of higher education and start working, but also students who switch. So students who stop with one program and transfer into another program the next year. And from these students, these 1 out of 3, about 50% of them say that they quit their program because the program wasn't a good fit for them. It didn't match who they were or what they'd like. And that leads, both dropout and switching leads to high societal, but also individual costs. Because, well, as I said before, there's a delay in graduation, but it could also mean decreased well-being, for example. So finding a good fitting study is very important. So that's why we are investigating what the individual differences between students have, what type of impact they have on making such a fitting study choice. So we're looking at the fit between a student and a study program. And a better fit is assumed to lead to better results. So that's kind of like one of the main hypotheses of these types of theories, which are called person-environment fit theories. And better results can be framed in all types of ways. So you could look at achievement, for example, GPA, Also time to graduation, persistence, but also results like student satisfaction or well-being are also being investigated. And what we also see is research examining this sort of fit between a student and a study program usually focuses on one type of student factor. For example, they look at the personality of students within a certain study program and what type of effect that has on, for example, their achievement. What is happening right now is that several authors have suggested that future research should investigate multiple student factors, because these individual differences also affect one another. So it is important to look also at the joint effects of these individual differences, but also in their interactive effects. So we're now at a point where we might wonder which factors are then useful for this type of research, and what is actually the current state of the field. And that's why we are performing a literature review. But because there is no overarching framework as of yet for higher education, it is difficult to determine which factors should be included in the review. And that's why we have adapted theory from organizational psychology, because these person-environment fit theories are heavily used in organizational psychology. So we've adapted the theory of purposeful work behavior by Barrick and colleagues. And that led to the following model. And as you see, I used a lot of colors, but they're here for a reason. So what we see at the left side, we kind of see our inputs. So we have the study program, and we have the individual differences such as personality and interests, which we assume to also sort of influence, or at least be related to students' needs and values and goals. And then both of those inputs lead to some sort of student study program fit that might either be high or low, of course. And then that amount of fit influences, hopefully, the study choice a student makes, and then influences motivation, and all these different outcomes such as achievement, persistence, satisfaction, etc. And well, we have made this hypothesized model, but the current state of the field is that this model is not being investigated. So what we did for our review is that we put all those green factors into sort of a predictor term for our review, and the purple factors were our outcome term of the review. But let me first quickly describe what we specifically used as our research questions. So we want to determine what factors actually determine the student study program fit, and specifically for the study choice and these different outcomes. And we also like to know how the identified factors relate to each other, or at least what the current state of the field is. So as I said, we are busy performing a systematic review to answer these questions. And we've performed a search in Web of Science, Scopus, and ERIC to do so. And as I said before, we used, as our search terms, we used combinations of these personal factors on one side, the study choice and the outcomes on the other side. And we used a contextual factor, such as a term as higher education or university, just to make sure that we didn't get all these studies that were about primary school or anything like that. And then we included articles that were peer-reviewed, published from 2000 and onwards in English, and that used validated measures, and very importantly, that made a comparison of programs or calculated a measure of fit. And this was an inclusion criterion that that led to having to, how do you say that, discard a lot of articles, because they, for example, only looked at differences in personality and whether that affected achievement, but not whether that was different for different types of study programs. And we wanted to know, of course, for the study programs, whether there were differences. We identified a total of 1,969 individual articles. So the duplicates were already removed in this number. And after full text reading, we have included 43 articles. And you can see that we've included 18 about interest congruence. So interest congruence is the specific sort of concept that already calculates the fit between the interests of a student and this sort of interests of a study program. And we've included 12 studies about personality, 7 about vocational interests. So that's also about interests, but then not with this measure of fit. But just making a comparison between programs. We found 3 studies that were about the goals, and it's really about the sort of life goals that students have. So what do you want to achieve in your life? What are you striving for? We found 3 articles about values, and we didn't find any articles regarding needs, and needs was framed in the self-determination theory, but we didn't find any articles comparing study programs. So there's, of course, a lot of work being done within the self-determination theory, just not just not studies that compare programs. We are still working on this review. So the backward and forward referencing is still being undertaken. So we might add a few studies. So as I said, we're still working on it. So I'll present some preliminary results for now. And what we've seen so far is that interests and interest congruence, so that's also interest, but then within that measure of fit, they both influence the study choice that a student makes. And also outcomes such as achievement and satisfaction. But what we see is that the effect size strongly differs per type of measurement. So whether it's solely interest as a predictor or interest congruence, and then also the way interest congruence is measured, because that can be done in a range of ways. And that really has an effect on the effect size. And the effect size also differs per outcome that is being investigated, which kind of makes sense because some of these outcomes are a little more indirect, so to say. So it makes sense that interest has a more direct effect, for example, on achievement than on time to graduation, because that's like it's a more indirect type of outcome. What we've seen so far as well is that personality types, or the personality types of students within a certain study program differ compared to other study programs, and that these also have a different effect on outcomes. So for example, there are studies that show that, for example, students who are in more economics or business like programs are or have a higher or score higher on extroversion, for example, compared to students in other programs. And what we've seen so far is that less is known about the effects of these life goals and the values that students have, but the existing evidence points in the direction that both have an influence on study choice, but there's not really been any articles that relate these goals and values to outcomes of the study choice, so achievement, for example. So as I said, we're still working on this, so it's just some preliminary results. So this is also kind of the end of my presentation. I'm not going into a discussion yet because it's still in progress. So thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, just let me know.